Welcome everybody to day 3 of the Somewhere Over the Rainbow free training. So I'm Paula Dreyer, and today I'm very excited to have guest instructor Jeremy Siskind joining us from Southern California. So welcome, Jeremy. And Jeremy is a fabulous jazz pianist and a Yamaha artist and a wonderful educator. Has, oh, I have an echo. If everyone could just mute themselves, that'd be wonderful. He's written a lot of beautiful books where classical pianists can learn how to explore jazz. And so Jeremy's joining us next weekend in Piano Connect. And so let's give a warm welcome to him. Welcome, Jeremy. Thanks so much for joining us. So before we dive in, can you just tell us briefly what you're going to be working with during Piano Connect?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm in the morning on Saturday, I'm giving one of my favorite presentations I gave at the National MTNA conference, which is called 5 Things Every Classical Piano Teacher Should Know About Jazz, but Probably Doesn't Know Yet. And these are things as I kind of travel throughout the country and share books and pedagogical methods and things like that, that I'm always frustrated that teachers do a bad job teaching their students. And as a jazz pianist, I want you to know. So I'm giving that on Saturday morning. Just to give you a taste, the very first thing is that swing feel isn't about rhythm, actually. It's much more about articulation than rhythm. But people don't teach that, people don't know it. So I want to tell you, because I want you to really understand what makes jazz work on a slightly deeper level, if you teach it on any level. And then in the afternoon, I'm giving a presentation called From Scales to Melodies. Basically, the theory behind that presentation is that in terms of, I can be a bit louder. Give me just a second. I'll change my microphone setting here. Is that a little bit better?
Yes, I think that's good.
Great. So in terms of creating a beautiful melody, whether you're improvising, composing, the best thing that you can possibly do from a theory standpoint is to know your scales really well. But of course, just knowing your scales isn't enough to make a wonderful melody. So the presentation, the whole idea is how do you bridge that gap from simply knowing that scale to being able to play. All right, I'm seeing some complaints about sound. I'm going to switch up my sound. I have a fancy thing
I can
going,
hear
but
you perfectly.
yeah,
Can anyone else say in the chat, are they having problems with sound?
I can change up my microphone.
I hear you
But
perfectly. I can
okay,
hear fine.
so
Tim says Lydia's shaking her head. Yes, she's good.
all
I think
right,
most people
well,
are great. So I would leave it. I
cool.
think it's just a
Okay,
couple.
I'll leave it.
Sorry
I'm
about
sorry. Eileen, turn up the volume, crank it up.
that.
I am. Can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't
Everyone else.
know.
No worries. Crack on. No worries. I can't hear
Sorry.
you, but okay.
All right. So those are the two main things, and then I'm actually giving a concert on Saturday night. So hope you can join us. I think it will be fun. And I guess let's get on to Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Let's start with a little bit of music. Can I just play for a second?
Of course.
And then we'll get into it, and I'll give you some tips of how I might approach the tune. Let me just play a little bit of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. All right, there's a little taste
Way
of.
to start the day. That was so beautiful.
Thanks. There's a little taste of jazz. It's pretty early for jazz. Um, the great pianist Marion McPartland, she had this story about this famous jazz photograph that was taken at 11 o'clock in the morning. And she said, I was playing at the clubs in New York, and at that point in my life, I didn't know that there were two 11 o'clocks, 11 o'clock a.m. and 11 o'clock p.m. I only knew the p.m. But I'm doing the best I can here. So let's talk about a few ideas that might kind of go beyond the lead sheet. I expect that you guys kind of all know what these chords mean. I could play it certainly C major, A minor, E minor, C7, F, right? The first thing for me is if I really care about a piece, and this is such a beautiful, iconic, evocative piece, I like to think about the emotion first. And of course we need to get all of the chords right, etc. But what kind of emotion do I want to put to this? Do I want it to be joyful? Do I want it to be dreamy? Do I want it to be wistful? And sometimes it even helps me to think about pieces maybe from the classical repertoire or even from the jazz repertoire that have that same emotion, and then kind of imitate them a little bit. So for me, I love the dreaminess of this piece, right? Somebody's longing for something, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high. They're dreaming. And so the first thing that I think of with dreaming is the top range of the piano, right? Because I think there's an uncertainty to that upper register, whereas down here, we know where we are. Up here, if I start to me, that feels like a question in a really beautiful way. So maybe the first thing that I do is experiment, not always being at the bottom range, but trying the top. And then the second thing that I just kind of intuitively did there was, instead of being blocked, like I demonstrated here, I just started arpeggiating my chords. And I'll do it with more simple chords. Right? And so notice I'm always splitting the chords between my left hand and my right hand. I know now that I'm up here you can't totally see, so I'm going to shift the camera over. So 3 notes in the left hand, 2 in the right hand, 2 in the left, 3 in the right. And the simple reason is that these wider intervals tend to be kind of more open and beautiful. And of course, there's a whole art to jazz voicing, and to any kind of chord voicing that you could study. But generally we aim for more wide open intervals. If we're always playing, really crowded things, these are all of the notes of a C7 chord, here's all the notes of a C major chord, but they're all crowded within an octave. And so it's just not going to be as open and beautiful to play. It sounds fine, but it's not nearly as interesting as... Now, as I'm playing there, the next thing that I'm doing is I'm adding some sevenths to chords. So instead of just C major, I'm adding this B natural, which is the major seventh. And you can hear it creates this kind of bittersweetness, this tension in the chord. Right? Now it's not quite so simple. Now there's emotional complexity. And as I get to A minor, I'm not just playing these 3 notes, which sounds very profound. But I like to add maybe this G natural, which would be the 7th. And again, for me, at least to my ear, it adds a little bit of bittersweetness. To this E minor chord, of course, I can add the 7th, which would be D. Maybe it's a nice time to introduce the 9th. If you're wondering what the 9th of the chord is, it's the same as the 2nd note of the major scale. So in this case, it's F sharp. And E is actually a funny key. I do a lot of teaching, and people are always like, oh, the 9th is the 2nd note, so it must be F. But you can hear that that chord's no good. So make sure that you get the ninth from the major scale. It's always a whole step above that root. So listen to that chord. It's so much more complex than just, there's that ninth, and you can't see it, but I'm playing the seventh in the second finger there. And if I want to use that C7, okay, so I'm going to mark on this sheet a little bit. So for C major, I'm making it C major 7, that's a B. For the A, I'm making it A minor 7, that's a G. For the E, I made it E minor, let's say E minor 9th, so I'm using a D for the 7th, and an F sharp. And by the way, if you're playing in a jazz style, you don't have to wait for an invitation from the lead sheet to add these things. These things can always be added. That's part of what jazz is making your own individual changes to the lead sheet. So as we get to this C7 in parentheses, potentially a dominant chord, what we can do with dominant chords in jazz, and I know I'm going fast through a lot of theory, technical things, but I just want to give you a taste, is we can add some alterations. We can alter the 5th or the 9th of the chord. So here, I think a sharp 5 would be beautiful. So G is the sharp, G is the 5th, and I can sharp that. So instead of having, I could have, see that? Now it's just a little more colorful. So using these, what we call upper extensions, that's the 7th and every note above that. So the 7th and 9th, and in jazz, we also deal with the 11th and 13th. We can make things more colorful, and then we can alter dominance. Paul, am I getting requests about camera angles I need to know about?
People are just wondering, so this lead sheet's on the main part of the screen, and then your hands are small, and we're wondering how to put your piano.
You should be able to shift over. You can see 2 white lines in between the shared screen and the camera angle, and you should be able to make the sheet smaller or bigger.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you can take control of that yourself.
Great.
Okay. So those are some things that you can do with the chord, the texture. You can see I'm trying to play it in this upper register to make it dreamy. But sometimes we can also actually change the chords themselves. And before we do a complete makeover, which maybe we'll get to, you might have noticed I played this crazy progression. Which has nothing to do with the chords that are written, and I can show you how I got there. But one of the things that I like doing is just changing bass notes. So one thing that we can always do with chords like this is we can make a pedal point. You're probably familiar with this term from classical music. Bach uses pedal points all the time, right? A pedal point, that term comes from organ music, where you'd hold a pedal down so the bass note would stay the same. So for example, I could take this C, and I could make C the bass note for all of these chords. So check this out. Hopefully it'll work. Kind of nice. So that's a pedal on the 1, right? C is the 1, we're in the key of C. Another common thing to do is do a pedal on the 5. So that would be G, right? Because we're in the key of C. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. G is the 5th. So it could be. So that's kind of nice too. And you could experiment with some different pedal notes. Another thing that you can do with just changing the bass notes rather than thinking about changing, the chords altogether, is you could put the chords into different inversions. So for example, I could start, instead of starting with C on bottom, I could start the chord in first inversion with E on bottom, which I happen to really like that sound. It sounds like a film score to me. Right? It's got a little bit more drama. And I especially like it in this case because the melody note is C. So here, the C and the C, they don't really make any harmony with each other. But C and E, we get kind of this other level of harmony, right? And we could go through and, we could even try to create some sort of a stepwise bass line, right? Right now, the bass line leaps around. So we have C, A, E, C, F, C. But if we start with this E, we could keep that for the A minor. That's the fifth of A minor. We'd be putting A minor in second inversion, I guess. And then we could keep it for the E minor. Oh, we're kind of forming a pedal point again. Look at that. We could keep it for the C, and then maybe go up for the F. And we could keep going up to the C, and then up again to A, and down to A flat for the F minor, down to G for the C. That G is the seventh of an A7, so I'm keeping it. And then I'll go down to F. So you don't need to be a theory genius to think about, oh, well, what if I put these chords in inversion? And so just to lay out what I did on the sheet, I started on E. That was the third of C major. I stayed on E, of course, for E minor. Put that over E. The F was over F. And then I was going up, so I thought, oh, why not keep going up to G, up again to A flat, G. By the way, this slash notation, some of you might be very familiar with it if you play in church, if you play in rock groups, but the slash, you would literally read, let's say, you'd literally read that one as C over G, a C chord with a G in the bass. Okay? So this is how we often write notation. Now, if you're really bold, and my ear is just starting to acclimate to this, but I've started actually loving sometimes putting the seventh in the bass. So for this C chord, and some of you are going to hate this, I love putting the B on bottom. I think it has just a special crystalline beauty, and especially if it resolves. But it's kind of fun sometimes to start with a little bit of tension. All right, just to throw another idea out there, I was saying that I'm gonna get myself into some trouble because I'm starting some things without knowing where they're going. But I was saying that I like to start pieces thinking maybe about a classical piece or another piece that I want to have the same emotion. And I'm thinking about this piece in Clair de Lune, right? Of course, everybody knows Clair de Lune. I'm gonna mess some of it up because I'm trying to play it. So one way that you could treat a piece like this is thinking, okay, there's just kind of these thirds hanging in the air. And actually, it's kind of funny, right? Clair de Lune does an octave leap as its first gesture. So it's the same in that sense as Over the Rainbow. So we could start Over the Rainbow with that same, these hanging thirds. And then just as in Clair de Lune, you could kind of bring in the orchestra. I always imagine that moment where where kind of the lower notes come in. I was bringing in the orchestra. So what if we did some... And I'm imagining strings entering there. right? So that could be a way to go. You could think in terms of a piece like that. Or I always love demonstrating with this Chopin Nocturne because everybody knows it. We could do that same thing. Right, all I'm doing is I'm taking that same accompanying line, a bass note, and then two interlocking larger intervals in the middle of the piano that Chopin uses here. And I'm just applying these new chord symbols. Instead of doing it in E flat major, I'm doing it in C major. And then I'm using the A minor. We could certainly steal, borrow, be inspired by classical pieces, and then use whatever we find and somewhere over the rainbow. It could even be that part of Claire Bloom where it's right. We could go. So that's certainly possible. And of course, as you're learning these kinds of things, I often get the question from teachers, if we're reading off a lead sheet, are we allowed to write things down, or do we have to, spontaneously come up with things? And I'm a big believer, you want to get to the point where you're spontaneously coming up with things. But in order to get there, in order to learn something new, oftentimes I have to write something down. And especially if it's something that involves some coordination and maybe some, planning, I need to write at least a few measures of it down. So take the time, do a little arrangement for yourself, and then memorize it and see if you can, deviate from it a little bit. It doesn't necessarily have to be that, only what I can think of as I'm watching this lead sheet, that's as good as it's going to get. Paula, I know I'm doing terribly in terms of time.
That's totally fine. Would you mind, since we couldn't see the keyboard so well in the beginning, now that we can see it, do you mind just reviewing that very first really open voicing so that we can see how you were voicing that?
The one at the top of the piano or towards the bottom of the piano?
It was the very first example where you were playing high up and it was very open.
Yeah, so I might, for that first C major 7 chord, I might do something like this. I have C, G, C, E, B, E. So notice how big these intervals are. We have this 1/3 here, but everything else is a 4th or a 5th. Here's E minor. You can see everything's just very wide open. So now I'm really self-conscious. Yeah, so you can see that my lowest notes are staying somewhere around middle C, and my hands are spread. I don't know if you're noticing that. In jazz, we so often have our hands very spread because we like these kind of open sounding voicings. And especially as that melody leaps up, now we have a lot of ground to cover. So both my hands are pretty much just spread as far as they can go. And of course, you don't have to be able to reach the interval because we're arpeggiating. But that's so often the case. If you want these really rich, beautiful, open-sounding chords, you're just gonna end up playing like this a lot. Of course, don't hurt yourself, don't overstretch, don't. If it hurts at all, stop. But those big intervals are what's gonna make it really beautiful. Do you want me to cover the bridge a little bit, or should I just kind of wrap up and take some questions?
I'm available if everyone is feeling good about it. I'm seeing some head nods.
All right. So for this bridge, so obviously the biggest difference here, I think, is that the melody gets way more active, right? From half notes and some quarter notes, a couple of eighth notes. It's just consistent eighth notes, right? But then you have this big open section, which kind of allows you to get in there and do something. And then the second thing that you should know about the bridge that makes it different than the A section is it's moving towards a climax. If you're ever dealing with popular songs, they all have a climax built in there somewhere. I know it's tempting to kind of think that, oh, it's just somebody singing in chords, but you can actually hear both in terms of the direction of the melody and the direction of the harmony. This is where we're building tension. So if I'm arranging the bridge, I'm probably going to do something a little bit more simple while this melody is really active, for two reasons. One is the listener is going to be focused on the melody. The second reason is just from my own perspective, I'm going to have to be dealing with. So I'm probably not going to have a lot, there's no sense in being that active in the left hand when the right hand is that active. So my first instinct is to add some harmonizing notes. So I'm adding fourths here beneath the melody. So beneath E, I'm adding a B. Beneath G, I'm adding a D. Those certainly aren't the only possibilities you could add. A fifth. If you want to get really fancy, you could add a little inner melody. I don't know. I'm just being silly now. And then as it kind of bubbles over, that's what I imagine. It's kind of like simmering, simmering, simmering. I think that's a time, if I were an orchestrator, I would, have the strings and the French horns and something playing a counter melody there, because there's not really a lot going on during those two measures. And this is something that you want to consider whenever you're making a piano arrangement is, where's the melody busy? I'm not going to do that much in the arrangement there. And then when's the melody really leaving an opening for me and almost demanding that I put something in? So again, I keep forgetting that second melody note. I don't recommend that. That's bad teaching. And notice that there's a dynamic arc to that phrase. It's not just. Right. It's bubbling up. It's going up and then it's coming back down. And then the second phrase needs to have a different dynamic arc because it goes all the way above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me somewhere. It goes all the way through. And I feel like we talk about this with our students when they're playing Mozart or Chopin, is that oftentimes the phrases will start the same, but they'll go in different directions. So I like to, I'd suggest doing something that builds in terms of the range of the piano there. So you'll notice that, again, I'm starting towards the top because it has this fluttering feeling. And I've even heard people say about this song that what's going on here is that Harold Arlen, the composer, is like simulating a bird flapping its wings, right? And then taking off. And so to me, it's weird to play it. If I were going to play this starting at the bottom of the piano, that doesn't capture to me the flight in the lyrics, the bird, the uncertainty, the hope. So I like starting it up here. So that phrase, again, it just has to grow, swell in terms of dynamic. And then you kind of, I think at least, I think the music calls for you to kind of arrive at that last A section, at the biggest dynamic, at the kind of peak of the emotional resonance, I'd say. And so you'll notice a couple things. First of all, as I said, in terms of the range of the piano, you're going to move lower because dynamics are like pyramids. You build them from the bass up. If you don't have bass notes, you're just going to kind of be banging on the top end of the piano. And then you notice my right hand is filling in as much as you can. Again, my hands are so spread because now the melody's up high, the bass is down low, and we have to fill in the middle. So, so both hands are contributing, right? There's a jazz piano approach that's called the third hand approach. And basically the idea is that the right hand's playing the melody, the left hand's covering the bass, and then the two are sharing this middle register because it's like you need a third hand to do it. And that's kind of what you have to do as this melody grows and gets. So that's kind of what I would do. I think of it really orchestrally, put in some kind of a melody. You know. So everything gets melodic as though those French horns were kind of jumping in and coming in with some commentary. So I think that's mostly what I want to, that's most of my ideas at this point, but I'd love questions. Happy to take questions. Comments, thoughts?
If anyone has questions, feel free to get off mute and ask Jeremy anything. We have some nice
Take care,
comments.
Elizabeth. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Thanks for the nice comment.
It's great.
Looks like Tim, you have a question? Nope. Oh, okay, thumbs up.
I see earlier Sheila said, what if you transpose rainbow to D flat and slipped in and out of Clair de Lune? That's a good idea. It's yours to have. Go for it, Sheila. Or you could transpose Clair de Lune to C.
Yeah.
Thanks, Anne. Wow, no questions. I guess I was just completely clear. I don't think so.
Way too much to absorb all at once, but it was great.
You have so many ideas. So beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, then. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending. Hope to see you all at Piano Connect.
Yes, if you want to learn more, come with us.
Piano Connect, I guess you can't buy part of it, eh? I tried because I can't go at all on Saturday and probably Sunday. So I wanted to just like go on Friday, but you can't do that, eh?
Oh, just pay by the day?
Yeah.
Why don't you send me an email and you have my email?
Maybe, probably.
Yeah, just reach out to me via email and
Okay.
we'll work something
Okay.
out.
Okay, because I teach from like 9 in the morning till 5:30 on Saturday. So
Gotcha.
it's like,
Yeah, shoot me an email.
okay. All right. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. That was
Cool.
so cool, so beautiful to just be able to hear your sounds and hear your thought process. Because we hear
Yeah,
all
My pleasure.
the things you're doing, it's so great to get that insider look into what you're thinking. Thank you so
My
much.
pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Awesome.
Take care,
Thanks
everybody.
for coming, everybody. And we'll see you tomorrow for the final day. We'll take it easy tomorrow, and I'll just pull it all together. So I look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. And yeah, I will send this recording, and you can look more closely and try and figure out these things that he was doing. All right, everyone, have a beautiful day or evening, depending on where you are. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you.
You're so welcome
Bye,
for
everybody.
coming.